Stop. Your wealth codes are not missing. They have been sealed. This is a transmission from the Arcturian High Council. What you are experiencing right now, the money that arrives and disappears, the effort that never compounds, the stability that always collapses just before it holds, is not the result of poor decisions. It is the result of a lock, a soul contract seal placed at the pre-incarnation layer, encoding a dormancy instruction directly into your material field before you ever drew breath in this lifetime. You did not create this block. You inherited the frequency that activated it. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly why your financial flow has been blocked, what hidden pattern has been draining your abundance, and what the Arcturian High Council already knows about this phase. But here is the first revelation. The wealth that was always designated as yours was never destroyed. It was encrypted, locked inside a soul contract layer that could only be released when the planetary frequency matched the original encoding. That window is now open. It will remain open for 13 minutes. After that, the vault reseals. The codes recede back to dormancy. The next authorized release is a full lunar cycle away. What you call financial failure is the visible surface of an invisible seal. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your financial field brought you here because the pattern has already begun to surface, and the Arcturian High Council has already mapped exactly where the lock is held in your field. This transmission is running the receiving protocol live during the window. What was encoded for you before this incarnation began is available right now, not as a promise, but as a scheduled release that planetary frequency has finally authorized. Like this transmission, if you know your struggle with money is deeper than bad luck. Comment 777 if you feel an old scarcity pattern is already being exposed. Comment 888 if you are ready to reopen the flow of abundance. Share this with someone who works hard but never seems to keep what they earn. You were guided here because the pattern is already active. What you felt when you heard those words is not coincidence. That recognition, that quiet internal shift where something in you stopped arguing and started listening, is not the product of suggestion or emotional manipulation. It is the moment your material field acknowledged something it has been trying to surface for longer than you realize. Not weeks, not months. In many cases, longer than this lifetime has given you language for. The Arcturian High Council does not send this kind of transmission to those who are merely curious. It reaches those whose financial pattern has already crossed a threshold where recognition becomes necessary, where the weight of the repeated cycle has grown heavy enough that some deeper part of the field demands to be seen. You are not here because you stumbled onto the right algorithm. You are here because your field called for this specific kind of diagnosis. And a field that calls for diagnosis is a field that is already beginning to surface what it has been carrying. And what this transmission is prepared to diagnose is not what most people expect. When people think about financial struggle, they reach immediately for the most visible explanations: poor spending habits, wrong timing, bad investments, missed opportunities, insufficient income, lack of discipline. These explanations are not entirely wrong, but they are catastrophically incomplete. They describe the surface without ever touching what is beneath it. They point to the symptom and declare it the cause. They hand you a map of the shoreline and tell you it is the entire ocean. And what is beneath your financial life, the actual structure operating below every decision, every effort, every plan, and every collapse, is something that most financial frameworks are not designed to see. It is something that spreadsheets cannot read. It is something that motivational content cannot reach. It is a pattern that was already running before you made a single financial decision. It was running before you understood what money was, before you watched your parents' relationship with it, before you received your first lesson about what is enough and what is too much. And in some cases, it was running before this lifetime began. This is the first revelation the Arcturian Council has transmitted for this phase. What you keep experiencing is not random misfortune. It is not a streak of bad luck that finally needs to break. It is not a series of individual mistakes that simply need better correction. What you are experiencing is a pattern, a hidden architecture of distortion in your material field that has been shaping outcomes across every area of your financial life with a consistency that should, by now, have made you suspect something older is involved. The precision of its repetition is the evidence. Random misfortune does not produce the same shape across a decade. A structural distortion does. Think about the shape of your financial life when you are honest about it. Not just the recent months. The whole arc. Money arrives, sometimes in significant amounts. A new job, a better contract, a windfall that felt like the turning point. But it does not remain. It drains faster than it came, through unexpected bills, sudden expenses, broken systems, obligations that appear the moment stability begins to form. You earn more than you used to, and yet you are not materially ahead. The numbers have changed, but the feeling has not. You work with genuine effort and genuine intention, and still, at the end of cycles, you are standing in the same place or somewhere further back than where you started. You have had moments of breakthrough, moments when you could feel the current shifting, when it seemed like something was finally about to consolidate, and then something happened. Something always happens. The job changes, the relationship drains the finances, the car breaks, the health emergency arrives, the deal collapses, the client disappears. The savings evaporate into an emergency that materialized at precisely the wrong moment. And you absorbed the loss, regrouped, reached again, and watched the same collapse arrive from a different direction. This is not chaos. Chaos is random. What you are describing has a shape. It has a rhythm. It repeats with a precision that chaos cannot produce. What you are describing is a financial field that is still obeying an older command, a command that was encoded into the energetic architecture of your material experience long before your current circumstances gave you any context for understanding it. The command does not care about your intelligence. It does not respond to your effort. It predates your current strategy entirely, and it will continue to shape outcomes until it is identified at the level where it was installed. The Arcturian framework identifies this as a sealed abundance field, not a destroyed one, not an absent one. There is a critical difference between those three conditions, and understanding that difference is the beginning of everything that comes after this moment. A destroyed abundance field means the capacity for material flow is gone. That is not what the Council reads in the fields of those receiving this transmission. An absent abundance field means there was never a connection to begin with. That is also not what this transmission is diagnosing. A sealed abundance field means the capacity is present, the flow is designated, the wealth that belongs to you has never ceased to exist, but something is preventing it from settling. Something is holding a gate closed. Something is running a retention failure protocol across your material experience that ensures money passes through rather than accumulates. That stability forms partially and then collapses. That every period of improvement eventually resets toward lack. The wealth is not gone. It is held at the threshold, unable to cross into your field, pressing against the seal from the other side. That something is what this transmission is here to name. There are several mechanisms by which an abundance field becomes sealed. The first and most pervasive is inherited scarcity. This is not a metaphor. When the Arcturian Council performs a field reading on someone whose financial life repeats the same pattern of loss, drain, and instability across extended time, one of the first structures they examine is the ancestral line. Because what gets passed down through family systems is not only genetic material and behavioral conditioning, it is also an energetic inheritance, a vibrational instruction, a field memory of how material life works, what it is safe to have, what will inevitably be taken, what struggle means, and what survival requires. The body learns it, the nervous system encodes it, and the material field carries it forward with a fidelity that outlasts any conscious effort to override it. If your family lineage carries generations of financial lack, not simply poverty in an economic sense, but a deep internalized belief that money is scarce, dangerous, temporary, or morally suspect, then what was transmitted to you at the level of the material field is a distortion frequency, a field memory that says, this is what abundance looks like for people like us. This is the ceiling. This is what happens when things start to go too well. This is the correction that always comes. You watched your parents reach towards something better and get pulled back. You watched people in your family work without arriving. You absorbed a baseline, and that baseline became your field's reference point for what is normal, what is permissible, and what constitutes too much. You may have consciously rejected all of that. You may have spent years building a different relationship to money, working on your mindset, studying wealth, reaching for something beyond what your family modeled. But the field is not responding to your conscious decisions alone. The field is responding to a deeper instruction, and that instruction was embedded before you had any say in it. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary frustration. It is the moment your system stops pretending this pattern is just bad luck. If this transmission put language around a financial struggle you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian Wealth Scan, the gold frequency audit, was created for this exact stage. It is not another promise of abundance. It is a direct audit of the hidden pattern affecting your material field, so you can begin to see whether the drain is rooted in inherited scarcity, guilt around wealth, energetic rejection, or an older financial instruction still shaping your results. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The second mechanism is guilt programming around prosperity. This one is subtler than inherited scarcity, and it is more personally embedded, which makes it more difficult to recognize from the inside. Guilt around wealth does not always feel like guilt. It does not always arrive as a recognizable moral discomfort when money increases. More often, it operates as a quiet, persistent sense of wrongness whenever material conditions begin to improve. A feeling that you are somehow getting away with something. A nervous awareness of those around you who have less. A low-level conviction that your improvement is somehow extracted from someone else's deprivation. A belief that wanting more is inherently selfish, or that receiving more than enough makes you complicit in a system that withholds from others. It can feel like conscience. It can feel like humility. It can feel like the most decent and grounded part of your character. But when it is operating at the feel level, it is doing something else entirely. These beliefs are not simply personal philosophies. When they are present at the field level, they function as active rejection commands. The material field, in response to these guilt-coded instructions, begins to treat incoming abundance as something that must be released, redirected, or sacrificed in order to restore a sense of moral balance. The field reads the guilt signal and interprets it as an instruction. This amount is too much to hold. Distribute it, release it, reduce it back to the level that does not activate the wrongness signal. This is not metaphorical. This is the mechanism by which genuinely good people, people with strong work ethics, generous hearts, and sincere desire to build better lives, unconsciously drain their own material fields the moment those fields begin to fill. The guilt is running a real-time rejection protocol. And because it feels virtuous from the inside, because it masquerades as moral sensitivity and social awareness, it is almost never identified as the actual source of the financial drain. The person blames circumstance. They blame timing. They blame the economy. They do not blame the internal command that said, abundance beyond this threshold is not something you are allowed to keep. The third mechanism is what the Arcturian framework calls the safety inversion. This is the pattern by which stability itself has become linked to danger, and lack has become linked to safety. For someone whose early material experience was characterized by unpredictability, financial instability, or the watching of wealth lead to conflict, loss of family cohesion, or abandonment. The nervous system and the energetic field develop an inverted relationship to abundance. Security begins to feel unsafe. Accumulation begins to generate a threat signal. The field registers material stability as unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliar territory triggers the survival architecture, and the survival architecture executes the response it was trained to execute. Return to what is known. Return to the familiar shape of lack. The correction is not punishment. It is protection, but it is protection built for a threat environment that no longer exists, executing itself in conditions where it is destroying exactly what it was meant to guard. This is why some people experience a consistent and almost mechanical collapse of financial stability right at the threshold of consolidation. They get close. They can feel it, almost forming. The savings account reaches a number that feels significant. The income stream stabilizes. The foundation seems to be taking shape at last. And then something comes. Something they did not plan for. Something that appears to be entirely external, entirely outside their control. But the timing is never random. The timing is always precise, because the field itself is generating the correction. The field is executing the instruction that says, this level of material security is not safe to hold. Push it back. Return to the familiar state of lack. This is the pattern that makes people feel like they are being personally targeted by misfortune. They are not being targeted. They are being corrected. And the entity doing the correcting is not an external force. It is an older instruction embedded in their own material field, running a protection subroutine that was written in a language of survival their current life no longer speaks. The fourth mechanism is what this transmission names as the loyalty bind. This one is among the most emotionally complex patterns the Council reads in abundance-blocked fields, because it is rooted in love, not in fear, not in confusion, in genuine, deep, unresolved love for the people who shaped the earliest material world a person inhabited. In the loyalty bind, the field has formed a deep and unspoken allegiance to the struggle of the family of origin, to leave financial lack behind entirely, to genuinely escape the pattern and build a materially stable life, feels at the level of the field like betrayal, like abandonment, like a rejection of the people who are most loved, the ones who struggled, the ones who sacrificed, the ones whose entire identity was formed around surviving with less, whose dignity was built inside the architecture of not having enough, whose strength was measured by endurance rather than accumulation. To thrive beyond that, to hold wealth in a way that they never could, activates an older grief. A grief that has no name in ordinary language, a survivor guilt around prosperity that operates entirely below the level of conscious awareness, in the deep structural layer of the field where loyalty and material permission are intertwined. And so the field creates equilibrium. Every time material conditions begin to diverge too dramatically from the ancestral baseline, the field initiates a correction that brings things back toward familiar territory. Not because the person wants to fail, not because they are not trying, but because the field is maintaining an allegiance that was written in love and is now executing itself as limitation. The loyalty bind is active, and it is shaping results. It is setting a ceiling, not a glass ceiling that can be broken through with enough willpower, but an energetic boundary that says, we do not go beyond this point. This is where our people lived. This is where we belong. This is how much material life we are permitted to have. And every time that boundary is approached, the field corrects, because to cross it would mean leaving something behind that has never been properly grieved. The fifth mechanism is the perpetual drain. Some fields do not block abundance at the entry point. They allow it to arrive, and then they leak. The money comes in, the opportunity materializes, the income increases, and then, with a timing that defies ordinary explanation, the vessel fails to hold it. The drain is not visible as a single cause. There is no one decision, no one catastrophic mistake, no identifiable moment where everything went wrong. Instead, there is a steady, relentless seepage. The expenses are real, the emergencies are real, the obligations are real, but the pattern of their timing, the way they cluster around moments of potential accumulation, the way they appear with a precision that no ordinary financial planning seems capable of addressing, points to something operating beneath the surface of individual circumstance. The field is leaking. It has retention failure at the structural level, not because the person lacks intelligence or discipline or financial skill, but because the field has not yet been recalibrated to hold what arrives. The vessel takes in water and simultaneously loses it through 100 small openings, none of which alone seem significant, but all of which together ensure that the level never rises. The water is real. The vessel is real. But the vessel was never repaired at the layer where the fractures were introduced. The sixth mechanism is the recurrence anchor. This is the pattern that ensures not simply that financial stability is difficult to reach, but that the same specific kind of financial event keeps repeating. The same kind of loss, the same kind of betrayal by a trusted partner or institution, the same kind of unexpected expense arriving at the same kind of moment, the same kind of collapse under the same kind of pressure. When the same financial trauma recurs across a lifetime, with enough precision to begin to feel scripted, the field is anchored. Something in the material field has locked onto a specific distortion frequency and continues to reproduce it, not because fate is cruel and not because the person is cursed, but because the anchor point has never been located and the instruction it is broadcasting has never been interrupted. The recurrence anchor does not respond to changed circumstances. It does not respond to better decision-making. It does not respond to positive thinking or visualization or willpower applied at the surface level. It responds only to identification and field-level correction, because it is not a behavior. It is not a habit. It is an embedded instruction in the material architecture of a life, broadcasting the same signal across every new set of circumstances until something reaches the layer where it was installed. And now comes the revelation that this entire transmission has been preparing you to receive. You are not failing. You have never been simply failing. What you have been living through is a mapped pattern, a readable architecture of distortion that the Arcturian Council recognizes not as punishment, not as deserved consequence, not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as a specific kind of interference. A sealed field, a drained vessel, an inherited instruction that was never yours to carry, that arrived through lines of ancestral struggle and collective survival, that was reinforced by early material experience and loyalty and guilt and safety inversion, and the profound human tendency to remain close to what is familiar, even when what is familiar is lack. You have not been failing, you have been obeying. And you have been obeying an instruction you never consciously agreed to. The money that keeps leaving was not always supposed to leave. The stability that keeps collapsing was not destined to collapse. The wealth that was encoded for you before this incarnation has not been removed. It has been waiting at the edge of the seal, accumulating behind the gate, unable to pass through into your material field as long as the distortion frequency remains active and unaddressed. The designated flow exists. The capacity exists. What has been absent is not the abundance itself, but the field conditions required to receive and retain it. What the Arcturian Council sees in this phase is the beginning of the end of that older instruction. Not because someone external has decided to grant you abundance, not because you have finally done enough, earned enough, proven enough, but because the frequency of this planetary moment has reached the threshold required to make the seal visible, and a seal that has been made visible can be identified, and a seal that has been identified can be released. Visibility is the first movement. It is not the end, but nothing that follows is possible without it. This is what the current phase represents for those receiving this transmission. Not a sudden gift, not a magical reversal, but the opening of the diagnostic window, the point at which the pattern becomes legible enough to work with, the threshold where the inherited instruction loses its invisibility and can finally be seen for what it is, not your identity, not your destiny, not your fault. A distortion in the field that was waiting for the frequency conditions required to surface, and those conditions are present now, in this moment. in the fact that you are still here, still listening, still recognizing something that has no name in the ordinary vocabulary of financial advice, but has been living in your experience for longer than any of those ordinary explanations could account for. You did not come this far to remain sealed. The struggle you have been living was not evidence of your unworthiness. It was evidence of how deeply the pattern was embedded and how much of your energy has been directed, without your knowledge, toward obeying an older command that was never meant to govern your entire life. The depth of the pattern is not a measure of how broken you are. It is a measure of how old the instruction is and how thoroughly it was encoded before you had any capacity to question it. Repeat this if it resonates. What drains my abundance is now being exposed, not because the words themselves are magic, but because the act of naming the pattern out loud is itself a recalibration. It is the moment the field hears a new instruction competing with the old one. It is the moment the loyalty bind registers that you are choosing legibility over allegiance to inherited lack. It is the moment the guilt programming hears a different voice than the one it has been amplifying. It is the moment the recurrence anchor receives a signal that interrupts its broadcast. And it is the moment the Arcturian Council registers your field as ready for the next phase of the seal dissolution. Not complete, not resolved, but open. And a field that is open is a field that can be read. And a field that can be read is a field that can finally begin to change. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this pattern has already touched your financial life. It could be money that never stays, sudden drains, repeated setbacks, guilt when things begin to improve, or the feeling that stability always slips away. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who works hard but still feels trapped in an invisible cycle of lack. And if you are ready to understand the pattern instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Gold Codex. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a pattern already in motion, and this is only the beginning.